Hey dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. What I want to do in this episode is continue working on our profile page. We've set it up a couple of episodes ago where we could edit the photo and change that, and now I want to be able to finish that a little bit more by editing the profile name and the profile description. So to do that, let's start off by coming into our server, controllers and user controllers. And I think we've already put in, we've already put in the code here to patch a particular user. What I want to do just for now is I'm going to change this to just console log the request body, just so we can see the stuff that's coming in. And this is going to work now by either failing or updating the data. And I'm going to send back a code, a JSON code, if it works. So I'm going to just change this to result, send the JSON code, and the code is going to be 200 if it works and a different code if it doesn't. So that's all I'm going to do there for now. We'll come back to that after, but it should mean that if our code within Flutter works, we should see in our console the updates being sent. Okay, let's close that out for now. So what we're going to be working in is the profile, and mainly in the profile block. So let's start off with our states first of all. Now we're going to have to add a couple of bits to our state here. We already have a profile screen edit if we're editing, but we need to now put in some additional information into here. And this is going to get a little bit tricky, but follow along. So what are we going to be adding in here? Well, much like when we did the login page, we're going to have a field for all the items we're going to change. And I say all the items, there's two things we're going to change. We're going to be able to change the name and the profile for that person. I'm also going to have a boolean, not a void, a boolean that tells us if the name is valid, and I'm going to have a boolean that tells us if the profile is valid. Now, I'm actually not going to do any validation on the profile. I'm going to allow people to have a blank profile if they want, but I'm putting this in so that if you do want to put validation in, that's something you can do and it'd be relatively straightforward. Okay, so given that, we need to update our constructor. And so what we're going to make the assumption is that when someone's on this page, their name is already valid, and so is the profile, because they wouldn't have one unless it was already valid. So during their sign up, when they created a profile or something like that, they must have had a username, and we're going to make the assumption that they're starting with a valid name. So this name valid is going to be true, and this profile valid is also going to be true to start off with. I'm getting some squiggly errors here because this is now not a named constructor. Before we were just passing in the user profile. Now with us passing in these extra bits and bobs, we're going to have to turn this into a named constructor. So we will do that. And we now get an error here saying that it can't be null. And that's right, it can't be null because we're passing it on. So we're going to say this is required. Okay, now what about the name and the profile? Well, initially they're going to be the same as whatever is stored in the user profile. So when you come to edit your name, you want the name that you're editing to start with the name that you currently are. So we're going to do that in our initializer here, and we're going to set the name to equal the user profile.name and the profile to equal the user profile dot profile. Now we're getting these squiggly messages because it's a constant, so we're just going to take that out, put in a missing comma there, and that is good to go. Now we're going to run into some problems later. We're going to have to make, don't worry about the error messages, we'll need to refresh for things to work. One of the things we need to do here is make changes, which means we're going to have a copy with function. And this is where it's going to get a little bit complicated. Let's use our little tool to generate our copy with. And you will see we run into this problem that we have to pass in a user profile. It is required. But the user profile isn't actually stored in our profile screen edit. It's stored in our profile screen loaded up here. So we can't do a copy with identically like this. What we're going to have to do is create a new constructor. And you can have multiple constructors in Flutter. And the new constructor is going to be pretty much like the original constructor. So I'm just going to copy it for a second. And I'm going to call this constructor from profile screen because we've already got a profile. Now this is going to require a user profile, a name, and all the rest of it, except within here we're going to be changing the name. So we're going to have in here this name, and because it's got to be there, I'm going to just set that to blank, and the same as this profile I'm also going to set to blank. And now we need to take it out of our initializer because you can't have it in both. Okay, so let me try and explain what's going on here a little bit. So just put this as a const. So here in our initial constructor, we're creating the name from an existing object. Whereas here, when we edit the name and we do a copy with, we need to be changing the name and copying it. Now we can't have a blank here because it is a final field. It needs to be something. So we'll give it something. It doesn't really matter what we put in here. This is never going to be called this part because when we copy with, we'll always be copying the original, which contains something, or passing in a new value. So when we do our copy with here, we're not going to copy with the profile screen edit. We're going to do that with the profile screen edit from profile screen. And then we can also pass in the user profile as the user profile. So we're not expecting a new user profile to come in, so we're always going to be copying with the original profile. However, and that's why we're not passing it in here. However, if we pass in a new name, then we will use that, or we will use the original. And the same with the profile, the name valid, and the profile valid. So the final thing we need to do here is make sure we override our props. Let's just make sure we get our brackets in the right place. It is that one, of course. And so we put our props, and the props that are likely to change or are going to change that we need to verify and check with Equatable that they are different is the name, the profile, the name valid, and the profile valid. The user profile is never going to change, so that shouldn't ever matter. Okay, that's good there. So let's save that. now and come back to, or not come back to, and come to our profile screen block where we now have an error message here. And that's because this is now a named constructor. So we need to send in our user profile. We just need to put our user profile like that, name it, rather than have it as blank, and that fixes that problem. Okay, so with that done, our system should be exactly the same. We shouldn't see any changes, but we're building the framework now for those changes. The next thing we need to deal with are the new events. So let's come to our profile screen event and create two new events. First one is going to be edit profile name, and that is going to extend a profile screen event, and that's going to take in a final string text, which will be the change. Okay, we need a constructor for that, just like that. We don't need a name constructor because nothing else is going to change there, and we need to override our props, and the only thing that's going to change is the text. So we can copy that and paste it below, and double click on edit profile name and hit Ctrl D to select both of those, and hitting the right arrow, delete profile, because the other thing we're going to change is the profile. So those two events are pretty much the same, just one is going to edit the profile and one is going to edit the name. Finally, we're going to have an event called save profile, which also extends profile screen event, and no prizes for guessing, that's going to be called when we actually save the profile. Okay, let's refresh that, or restart the app, make sure we've got rid of all those errors, and everything is looking good if we come to the profile page. Okay, now to the block itself. So we need to handle those three events. So we have on edit profile name, which we'll call edit profile name. We're going to have edit profile. It's not some bad naming going on here, I think, by myself, but those are the events. And finally, the save, which I'm just thinking we might not use. I'm thinking we might do it under the switch edit. So I might undo that in a minute. Let's concentrate on these two, and let's create those two methods so that we're good to go. And again, we've made changes now to the state effectively, so we'll give that another hard restart. Okay, let's come to our user interface on our profile page. And let's start with the name. So let's come down to where we have the name, which is here. There we go. So we have a fitted box which has our profile name in it. So instead of this fitted box and a text box, let's put a comma in there, we want a text form field if we're in the edit mode. So let's put a builder around the fitted box, block builder, and this of course is going to be the profile screen block. Okay, so within our builder we'll say if state is profile screen edit. If we're in the edit mode, we're going to do something, otherwise we're going to display what we had before. And so what we're going to do is, for the something, is we're going to display a text form field. That text form field is going to have an initial value, and that's going to be the name that we set, and I want the style to be the same as we've got for the fitted box here, the text box here. So I'm just going to copy the style out of there and paste it up here, and we'll put a semicolon. Let's save that and come to our app. And if we go to our profile page now and we hit the edit button, we have a text form field now where we can type extra stuff in. And of course this is switching the mode. Now when we switch back we lose the state because we're not saving it yet, but that works. Okay, so how do we update the state? Well, exactly like we did with the login form, we use the onChanged and we take a value that's given here and we use context.read our profile screen block, and we add an event, and the event we're going to add is edit profile name, and the value is going to be the value. Then if it's not valid, we're going to put in a validator, and the validator also takes the value, but we're not really using that value. We're going to return state name valid. If the name is valid, we're going to return nothing. If the name is not valid, we're going to return an error message, and that error message is going to be name should be 5 cars or longer. Let's go with longer. Okay, and that's that done there. The next thing we can change is we have here the profile name that's being passed in. Well, we've now got the state here, so we can here put in, because we know this is the state view, state as profile screen view dot user profile name, and that means we can get rid of the profile name that's being passed in here. We no longer require that, so that can go, and a bit further up where we are passing it in, we can take that out of there. That should all still work. Next, we need to deal with the user profile, and we're going to do the same here. Instead of returning just the text, we're going to say state is profile screen edit. So if we're in the editing state, then we're going to have a text form field. Otherwise, we're going to have just the text. So the text form field is going to be pretty much the same. We're going to have an initial value, which is going to be the state profile, and we're going to have an onChanged, which will take a value. And again, we will do context.read what profile screen block dot add an event and edit profile name and pass the value. Now, as I said, I'm not going to do the validation for this because I'm going to accept a blank profile, but if you did want the validation, you just have to add it in exactly like we did below. It's exactly the same, except you would be putting state profile valid and a better error message for your profile, or relevant error message for your profile. Okay, I think that's everything. I'm going to save. I am going to do another restart just to make sure there aren't any hangovers there. And now when we come to edit, we have both of these editable. I'm going to make one more change to this. Actually, I'm going to, where is it? Here on the text form field, I'm going to say the minimum number of lines is 10 and the maximum number of lines is 15. And that will give us what looks like a much better editing. Now, you might have just noticed a problem there. When the keyboard pops up and this goes up, it behaves normally, but our edit icon has now gone. And that was by design before. We didn't want the edit icon there when we scrolled away. But if we're in the edit mode, we do want that icon to show, even if it is like this. So we're going to need to make a change to the edit icon as well. So let's come down to that edit icon, which is here somewhere. There we are. And we have this visibility. And we're saying if it's not at the top, or it's visible unless it's not at the top. So we're going to have to also wrap this with a block builder, because we're going to need to know the state of this. So profile screen block. And we just need to say here, it's visible if it's not at the top, or state is profile screen edit. So from the edit mode, it is going to be visible. We can also change the icon. So by default, we've got this edit icon. So what we can say here is state is profile screen edit. If it is in the edit, then the icons can be save icon. Otherwise, it can be pencil icon. Okay, then we got this red squiggly because of this const. So we'll take it out of there, then that will complain that that's not a const, so we'll put that in there. Now if we save that, we should see our edit button comes back, but now it's a save icon, and if we click it, it reverts back to the mode. Oops, reverts back to the mode and the pencil. So that, I think, looks a little bit better. Okay, so now we've got those updating, we need to do something with the data. So let's now come to our block, and I think I am going to do this under the switch edit mode. I think we don't need to have another event to save it. So what we've got here currently is if we're in the edit mode, we just switch back to our standard mode. And so in here, we're going to need to do something different. So let's comment that out for a second. So first of all, we're going to want to check whether our two items are valid. So we're going to say if state name valid and state profile valid, then do something. If they're not valid, I'm actually not going to do anything at all. I'm not going to change the state. So I'm not going to allow someone to come out of edit mode with invalid data. That's fine. The next thing I want to do is save it to our API. However, there's no point in doing that if nothing has changed. So if you think about our app here, imagine someone clicks on the edit and just changes a photo. If this text hasn't changed, there's no point in saving it. Yep, so we can ignore it. So if that's the case, then we're going to say this. So if state name does not equal state user profile name. So essentially we're saying if it doesn't match what our name originally was, or our state profile does not equal our state user profile. In those cases, we're going to save the data. However, if they are the same, then we're just going to do what we originally did. And to copy it, just bring that down, and we're just going to allow them to switch the mode. Okay, so if nothing's changed, we're just going to switch the mode back to as it was. If it has changed, then we're going to save the data here. Fantastic. Well, to save the data, we need to call upon our repository. So let's come over to our conference repository interface, and let's think what we're going to need over here. Well, I know it's going to return an integer. We're going to return a code number, which basically says, yes, this has worked, or no, this hasn't worked. So it's going to be a future int, and we'll just call it save user profile. We need two things here. We need the user ID and we need the user profile. And what I'm going to do is actually pass in a whole user profile, because that contains all the data we're going to need. So I'm just going to say here user profile, I'll call it user profile. And that's going to be the interface that we need. Okay, we save that. We've now got an error saying that we don't implement that. Control dot create one missing override, scroll down, and we're ready to go. So we'll come back to that in a second. Let's come back to our block though and actually save the data to there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new user profile equals called new profile is going to equal our state user profile. So it's going to equal the current user profile, copy with the things we're going to change. And the things we're going to change are the name, which is going to be the state name, and the profile, which is going to be the state profile. So that gives us a new user profile, and which we can pass, but it contains the edited name and profile. So then we can call our repository. We're going to get a response, so we'll say the var response equals await. So it's going to need to be an async function. Let's put that in a second. Repository, save user profile, and we've got to pass in a profile, and it's the new profile that we're going to pass in. So let's add the async modifier and come back to our, don't need the interface anymore, come back and implement this. So here we're going to do something very similar to this. We've already got this private get event for setting up the headers and everything else for getting. Well, this isn't a get request, this is going to be a patch request. So I'm going to copy this private get that we've got, copy and paste it, and change this new version to a patch. Okay, now a patch is pretty much the same. We're still going to need our token, we're still going to need our authorization and all the rest of it. We're going to need a path, but we're also going to need a body, and that's going to be a map of type string, which we will call body. Now we need to pass that body to our, let's put a comma there, put this on multiple lines. So we're going to pass the body to our server, and we can do that very simply by making sure it's a JSON encoded body. And we need to put a colon there. Okay, now this is red because there's no such thing as a body in a get. So I'm just going to change the get to a patch, which is what the difference is. And now that allows us to do that. But there's one more header we're going to need, because we need to tell our server what type of data it is. And it's type HTTP headers content type header, and it's going to be an application JSON. That's the header type that we're passing to our server. Okay, so with that done, we can come now back down to our method and implement it. So we're going to say the response is going to equal the await from our patch. Where do we want to patch to? Well, it's going to be to the users and then to the user ID. We're going to get the user ID out of the user profile UID. The body then is going to be the bits we want to change, and that is going to be the name, which is going to be the user profile.name. And let's just get rid of this error here. So we've got an async and I'm missing a curly bracket there. Let's put that in and format that. So the response is going to equal the patch to that address. We're going to change the name and we're going to change the profile, and the profile is going to be user profile.profile. So those are the two bits of information we're patching through. Then we're going to get a response, which is going to be a code. And so we've awaited that, and we're going to return the response code. Okay. Now this might also fail, so we could also put a, it might fail for other reasons such as network failure or something else like that. So we could put a try catch around all of that, and I think I'll come back to that in a minute, not to confuse matters too much yet. Okay, let's come back to our block. So that should save. So if all goes well now, if we do a hot restart of our app and come to our terminal, because of the change we put in right at the beginning, we should see the data coming here. So let's go to our profile, edit, and change my name to 123, and also the profile, I'll add 123. And if we save that, we get nothing. Okay, so we just need to now, I've totally missed doing this part, which is quite important. We need to make sure that we update our name in our state, because without doing that, of course, nothing changes. So in our edit profile name within the block, what we're going to do is a bit of error checking. And we're just going to say for this is if event.text.length is less than 5, then it's not valid. And so in that case, we're going to omit state as profile state edit, copy with, we will update the name to be whatever is being passed in, so the event.text, and we're going to say the name valid is false. In that case, I'm going to copy that and say else. So if we have got more than 5 characters, then we're going to copy it, but of course say the name valid is true. And then it's pretty much the same for our editor profile, except we're not changing the name, we're changing the profile, and we're going to just say the profile valid is true because we're not actually doing it in the error checking there. Okay, now let's try again. Give that a restart. Come to our edit, let's change something and watch our server, and if we hit save, there we are. We have now coming to our server the updated name and the profile. Fantastic. So we can deal with that. However, looking at our screen, nothing has changed. We're still in edit mode and we don't want to do that. So we're saving the data here now, and we're going to await that. However, what we're going to do is something, we're going to be optimistic about this, and we're going to say that if it's passed our validation anyway, then we're going to assume it's going to work. So what we're going to do immediately is emit a new state, and the state we're going to emit is the profile screen view, which takes in a profile, and we're just going to pass in the new profile. So immediately when we click the save button, providing it's all past the validation here, we're going to show the screen with the new changes. Then we're going to call the server, and then we're going to say, well, if the result does not equal 200, so if we get any error message back, any error code other than 200, then we will omit the profile state again, but this time not with the new profile, but with the original user profile, and so it should change it back. So if I hit save again now, it should go back to GGG, which is fine. But if I come to our server user controller, and we'll send back another error message, we'll just send back 400 now. So if we edit this and put something else in and save, you see how it flips back. We've got the error message back, it's not 200, and so it was DDD for a few seconds and then flipped back. Again, you can see that if I take off those two, watch carefully, it'll immediately change to be correct and then very quickly flick back. We'll look at that again after. So providing everything is okay, it's going to save and it's going to go GGG. Now, the next part we just need to deal with is we're not dealing with our form being valid. So that's no longer valid. It's less than 5 characters. If I save that, I'm not getting any response. It's not being saved to the server and it's not changing, but our error message isn't appearing. So we need to deal with that next. And the way to do that is on our profile page, where we have our on tap here, there we are, to switch edit mode. We're going to have to do something based on whichever mode we're on. So we're going to say here, if state is profile screen edit, so if we're on the edit page, then we're going to validate form here. If we're not on the edit screen, we're not going to validate the form, and then we will call the switch. So how do we validate the form? Well, we need a form to validate. So coming right up to the top in our build menu, we're going to, in our build function method, we're going to create a global key of type form state, which we'll call form state, and that's going to equal a global key of type form state. And then we need to have a form, and we're going to have to wrap this nested scroll view with the form, because we've got one element in the header and the other element within the body. So let's wrap that with a widget form and pass it the key form state. And then we're also going to have to pass that key through to our header. So where we have our Silver persistent header, our profile name bar, okay, we're also going to have to pass that form key. So we'll do it as form key and form state. Of course, that doesn't accept that yet. So coming down to the profile bar, we will say we expect a final global key of form state, which we're going to call form key, and that is going to be required. This dot form key. Okay. Now we have that form key coming through to us. We can come down to our gesture detector. And we can say, that's not a private, form key dot current state, which does exist, validate. And that'll do. So if we're in the edit mode, it will then call validate on all the forms elements, and then it'll try and switch the mode. So if we save that now and hit our save, we get our error message. If it's 5 characters or longer, then it'll save and flip back. Okay, but of course it's not actually working yet because we're sending back our 400, sorry. Okay, so the final step is now to get this bit here working and to actually save the data. So what are we going to do here? Well, we've got our body coming in, we know that. We can get rid of that now, we know that's working. So we've got 2 bits of things that we're going to save. We've got the name, which is going to be the request body name, and we've got the profile, which is going to be the request body profile. Now, something that's really important here with an API is we've done our validation on in our Flutter app for the 5 characters. However, that is only for the presentation. Any wider user could override that, and unless we do the validation on the server as well, then there's a lot of potential for misusing your API. So we are going to do a test here as well. Thankfully the validation is straightforward. We're going to say if name length is less than 5, then we're going to return and we're going to return this. We're going to return 400, and that means an error. Otherwise, we're going to await our DB collection, the users collection. We're going to await the document, which we're going to get from the request params ID. Okay, so that's this. And don't forget, we're already calling our authorization require self, so we know that this ID has to match the ID of the authorized user. So we know that only a person can edit themselves unless they're an admin as well. And then we're going to set what we're going to set. The name and the profile. Now it's quite important here, vitally important, that we also put merge true, because otherwise our data will just end up with a name and a profile. We need to use set just in case some of this doesn't exist. It's just a bit of belt and braces, but as long as we're merging into our data, then everything is good. Okay, and if that works, we're going to return 200. However, it's possible that this fails for some reason. The database doesn't work. So we're going to put a try and a catch around it. And we need to put a return in here to make sure it doesn't go any further. Ooh. And if we have an error, then we're going to return a 500, which generally means there's been a server error of some description. Okay, that should be it. So if we come back to our page now, let's reload that from the database so we've got correct data here. And if we change it now to 123, 123 and hit save, the profile doesn't change, but the name does. Yeah, let's come back to our profile screen edit where we have that's our name, and here we have our text form field where we're editing our profile, and we're also changing the name here. So that was a little critical error. So let me just reset the data, and now if we try and save 123, 123, that gets saved correctly, and we can come back and we can see those changes have happened. Okay folks, there we go. That is editing our profile page taken care of for now. There's some little bit of refactoring we can do when we come back to refactor and harden our code. But for now, we'll leave it there. If you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out, and we'll see you next time. Till then folks, take care. Bye now.